This is Master of Orion, Ad Astra, a 4X game inspired by this legendary video game IP. Master of Orion is an IP that I've never played, but it's from 1993 with an insane amount of online clout. So this board game has a lot to live up to, and I can genuinely confirm this is a true 4X as part of the shelf side committee that has played this 4X and this 4X and then this one and this 4X. And this one that's 4X-ish. Okay, yes, we played a lot of 4Xs, and I'm a sucker for sci-fi and ships just blowing each other up in space. In Master of Orion, you're picking one of 6 unique factions to be the best in the universe. You research tech, build buildings, send diplomats, fight each other, explore, kill the Guardian defending Orion, and take the wonderful planet for yourself. There's just a lot of 4X stuff in here. How it works is that you'll actually draft technology every round, which will help dictate your actions. And the game can actually end early as opposed to other 4Xs. By the way, Master of Orion is 1 hour per player and 2 to 4 players. Number of plays we did on screen. Now, this is a prototype for a sponsor review where the gamefound / Kickstarter is currently planned for spring 2025. But there's a lot of game here to cover, and if this type of sponsorship does bother you, because while we try to be perfectly unbiased and objective with our analysis, that's kind of impossible to be perfectly unbiased. Yep, we understand if you want to click off. But man, if you're as excited and curious about how this relates to TI4, let's strap in. How to play. Goal is to have the most victory points by the time the game ends, which for now, let's just say is 6 rounds. To get VP, there's a ton of sources, but primary ones are holding valuable planets, doing your secret objective, doing public objectives, and not having too much unrest, which is negative points. To own a planet, you'll need population there, which is how much of that resource you'll produce every round from there. Every round has 2 different main parts. First is a card drafting, where each player will look at 5 technology cards, then pick 1 to add to their hand. These cards are dual use. They give you an additional action to use as a one-time use, and if you have the level of tech researched for the color, you permanently unlock its ability. So back to the drafting, you're going to draft 3 cards by passing them around, picking 1, then the rest get discarded. Then is the main part of the game, where you do actions by playing cards from your hand. You have the tech cards you've researched, then your starting 4 generic cards, and your faction card. On a turn, all you do is place a card from your hand and choose one of the symbols to do. They are growth. Grow more population in any planet you own by paying food. Produce. At a planet you control, build a building you've researched, or build 1 ship by paying hammers. Research. Research a new tech level by paying its cost. Then the weird one here, diplomacy. You roll dice equal to your influence on the board you spend, and then you activate a bunch of actions, like placing more influence that is worth points, or increasing or reducing a player's unrest, or drawing diplomat cards you can later give away. Then there's these ship-based actions you can decide to do with these 3 copies of cards, like flight. On 1 tile, move a group of ships up to its movement speed. 1 entire tile is 1 movement. Attack. On 1 tile, move a group of ships equal to its movement speed and attack, which we'll explain in a bit. Invasion. If you have ships floating around an enemy planet, you roll dice to nuke population there and maybe put down your own population. And lastly, explore. If you're on a star tile with the symbol, you draw 2 special cards and keep 1. If you don't want to do an action or have no more cards in hand, you pass. And if you're the first to do this, you move your marker to go first next round, get a free resource, and you're out. There is more to this mechanic, but all you need to know for now is that you can't do anything else this round. Oh, also before your turn's action, you can do a free action. One is giving a diplomat you have in your hand to someone, which will probably help them later. Good for making trade deals. Another free action is forced labor, which gets you any amount of 1 resource, but you have to increase unrest the more you do this. Unrest is how many resources you have to lose end of rounds, and also negative VP. So now, combat time. When you attack someone, both players will roll dice. Then choose any technologies they might want to trigger for that combat round before rolling dice. Then you roll and assign the numbers to cards. You can usually only use 1 box on a card per combat, but you can stack multiple dice on top of another to fulfill a card. Attackers assign hits, and then players can decide to retreat by playing a flight from their hand. If not, the combat goes another round. When combat ends, all attacking ships are exhausted. And that's pretty much the game. You do 6 rounds of this. Also at the end of rounds 1 through 3, new public objectives are revealed. But also, the game can end earlier if you control an enemy's home planet, or if you control Orion, the last tile to explore that has a big Guardian defending it. So that's hard to do early, but again, that can end the game early, and killing it gives you benefits. Pros! Starting with component pros, we got a lot of cool prototype ship minis. First, they all come with stands, which makes seeing them a lot easier on the board, and easy to move around. Just grab them in your preferred way with your fingers and place them. Plus, every faction has their own different ships. Now, mind you, they look similar enough, with the frigates always being a lump of ships, so you don't get that confused. And if you are confused, you can look at how big the base is. Bigger is stronger. And the neutral pieces also look cool. Check out this eel. And this Guardian defending Orion looks like a proper beast, which is great because fighting him is scary. And for the playing area in front of you, the recessed areas for tech and economic tracks with clear cubes work excellently to just move up and you can see what you're at. Symbols of this game are also very clear, like the 8 different types of actions that have their own icon, which is all easily identified. This really helps drafting go smoothly. There's never really confusion about what tech a card corresponds to, even from across the table. It's just so clear for its size. The fact that they made each planet's population be D4 dice is actually really clever, as it's easy to tell what's at the top and not require much effort to increase. And there's plenty of art in the game for diplomats, but what caught our eye was how there's art on some of the tech cards that progresses up. The player aid also has a clear back to see how strong neutrals are and what the buildings do. No fiddliness here with cards for each type of building. No, they're all here. I'll end component pros with how this game, for such a big game, is actually not that fiddly. You only get resources at the end of a round. You just get them all at once after you've passed your turn. And if you already get some more mid-round through forced labor, you're just gonna spend those resources right away. So bookkeeping logic dictates that you don't actually have to grab those resources, just spend the ones you currently have. Plus, if you look at the board, there's actually not that many ships on the actual board. And turns are just playing one card from your hand. And combat is even just rolling one type of D6 dice. That's it, but we'll get into combat later. Because we gotta cover gameplay pros. And let's start with your hand management that's fueled by the draft. Remember, what you're doing on every turn is just playing a card from your hand. Having 4 generic cards with 1 more faction cards gets bundled with 3 tech you draft every round. This is really clever, because everyone's actions each round will be slightly different with different top rights. And because tech can be permanent, that makes the drafting even more nuanced. All cards are valid, which is great for drafting because you can draft for action versatility with the high tier ones, even if you're never going to go down that path, or if something's tier 1, it's so reachable you might just grab it to pivot tech and develop it. Because cards carry on between rounds, you can possibly go big brain and take a card that you're planning on getting researched next round as you hold a card and then feel a huge power spike by having a tier 3 tech on round 2. Oh yeah, tech cards, they're awesome in diversity and abilities. So there's 4 different colors and I would classify them as the green biochem is weapons, shield, economic, and invasion. Blue physics is weapons and shield based, and then helping the research action. Orange engineering is defensive and weapons, and then helping the construction action. Purple government is the weird one, with assisting the diplomacy action, then doing all sorts of weird things like unexhausting ships. Now we get to have fun and mention some standout techs. Constructing a pleasure dome to make your citizens mad happy by just spending influence to easily drop unrest. You know, unrest, the negative VP on your economy that isn't easy to drop. Yes, high tier is fun. Look at Teutonic Engineering to make all your buildings free. Another highest tier Xeon missile will literally destroy 1 ship off of probably 2 to 3 dice, regardless of that thing's HP. This all culminates into this tech action drafting that is super intuitive to draft away techs your opponent might be wanting, or you could just get your techs. Importantly, it doesn't punish you too badly for bad drafting because all cards are viable as actions or to save for next round. Lastly, the fact that you're only seeing 3 to 5 at a time in your hand, with only 12 in total seen around, means that beginners can slowly learn about the cards, instead of being all spewed out at once. TI4 and Civ. Yes, a bunch of 4Xs do this, that's just what the complicated heavy genre tends to do. And the fact that you can't draft flight / attack / invade / exploration actions, I mean everything on this card, means that these actions are easy to track every round. Everyone can only do 3 of these, so you can't get surprised by someone's attacking draft. Now let's get to the actual meat of this game though, the action phase after you've done the drafting, and we can talk about the way this game does exploiting, the exploiting part in a 4X, where your economy is a really clever push and pull of resources. You get recurring resources from population on planets, where there's 3 different resources, and you can spend food to grow any population. The more population that's on there, the more expensive growing it is. So food is necessary to grow, but actually doesn't do much else in this violent, technology-ridden world. So you have to think about how much food exactly is necessary for you to ramp up. Then money, the BC that looks like Bitcoin, gets increased via income, which is your faction's own unique thing that is different. Money is cleverly implemented that you can spend 1 to boost any action, like getting to grow on 1 more planet. And then you can just keep spending to grow on more planets. Like if you boost research, you can research twice for 1 action. Still gotta pay the research though. And you can't infinitely just grow your planets because they have a production cap. But that can be improved by researching terraforming, so that requires research. Or how getting more production on any planet can be achieved by just researching buildings. Smack those down and you don't have to worry about boosting population via food necessarily. Now maybe you're concerned about getting more hammers. And big shout out to forced labor, that is the mechanic. As a concept, not so fun, but this mechanic again is before you take any action, you can free action this for any amount of any resource, as long as you're willing to take the scaling unrest hit. That means you can continually puzzle whether it's worth it to sink on rest. For example, maybe you just really want a big ship. So you get those hammers. People are mad unhappy, maybe they want to revolt, but don't worry, this big ship is gonna go conquer. I think it'll be worth the negative VP hit for now. Now let's praise the influence mechanic, where you put your faction's influence marker down on spaces via the diplomacy action. And influence is kind of like a resource mixed in with area control ideas. See, the only way to spread it is via this diplomacy action. And since doing diplomacy requires flipping influence, but can put down influence in of itself, it's at minimum a 1, to then a 2, to then a 4 influence drop as the round goes on. Exponential growth if unchecked by others. And remember, it's 1 point endgame for being on your opponent's planets. But are you gonna take a diplomacy action on a turn? Much less use diplomacy to drop influence and not do these other cool things? This makes influence be its own little side race because you can only place somewhere your influence is adjacent to, and has no current influence. If you want to remove something, you need a 6+ roll, meaning it's much harder. You also can't do this multiple times per diplomacy action. There ends up being this cool trifecta of control in this game, where you can hold tiles with ships, or have population on the planet, or have influence on it. Depending on the game state, one or the other might give more points. This is really cool dynamicism where depending on the game state, one or the other might give more points and hence is more valuable to focus on. Moving on with gameplay pros, we really like how this 4X handled player order. As a short primer, going first in games like these are good to attack your opponent first or to drop influence before they can. But going last also has its benefits of reacting last and having the final say in a round. So now for the turn order handling, if you pass first in a round, meaning you might have less actions than everyone else, you get rewarded with 1 of any resource. Then you can control the neutral pirate frigate to probably attack your opponent's ship, and then your first next round. So you can often consider passing early to try to get a leg up. But if you pass last in a round, you get to go last next round, which can be good, and you get to choose a public objective. Man, that's also pretty good. And say you don't want to pass yet, well, there's actually ways to tech up the stall because you carry over unused tech from your hand to the next round. And every tech tree color has a tech to do an action by spending 1 money. So when you add this up, you're not always certain if players will play a card from hand in the who will pass first mind game. Now we gotta cover the space combat because Space 4X, gotta talk about the fighting ships. And Master of Orion has very clean space combat. See, if you look at the board, there's actually not that many quantity of ships. That's because you can normally only build 1 ship per construction action, and construction action is 1/4 of this card here. This is your starting card. Combat feels impactful because if players decide to do it, they're foregoing the opportunity to pass. And health on units is rather low, with the highest Doomstar is 6. So there's just not that many combat rounds, low health, and low quantities of ships to make it easier to track. Oh, a nice emphasis on planning for certain rounds of combat with these weapons, and it makes deciding how to use the shields per combat rounds a bit more interesting. And so there's some nuance on what combat rounds you should use your shield in. That's just cleanliness of combat. You flip over the card once to use its ability, then when you roll the dice, you assign an X to their damage. Units either die in combat, or they survive and heal back up to full health. Combat also ties in with hand management because to run away from a fight, you have to use a flight card to retreat. So sometimes you hold on to that for safety. Lastly, there's a space cap of things per tile, which is much appreciated. You can't infinitely stack ships, and you can't have more than 1 space base per tile to prevent hard turtling. Positioning on tiles does slightly matter too, because units in the front of combat have to die first. So when you're capturing, say, the middle tile, who you think will attack you next matters. The next gameplay pro is that all the point sources in this game add a sort of dynamicism to gameplay, at least from the point sources we've tried to pursue. You can spread influence to get points from that, and then have your unrest be low, and then push everyone else's unrest up, and this is kind of a cultural source of points. Or you can go militaristic to take other people's valuable planets, or Orion, which gives 6 money and 6 resources to kill a guardian, and 5 points for controlling the planet. Or there's emergent ways to get points off of the public objectives, or you can just do your secret objectives, which both do a good job of inciting conflict. And everyone is super connected because the map is small, and there's wormholes that connect the middle to everywhere else, and Orion to every wormhole. This adds up to point scoring where planet holding is mixed in well with other smaller sources, and if someone goes for Orion, that 5 VP is usually enough to be a huge tipping factor, so you're on your toes about that. What's the point source we haven't pursued? That would be buildings, where if you hit tier 5 of any tech, you unlock these 3 buildings. Yes, one is hilariously called HTTP, but hey, this IP was around in 1993, so HTTP was probably a cool next level nerd thing back then. Anyways, the highest level of this is basically a wonder victory, because it ends the game at the end of the next round and gives you 6 points, which is a big surge. We just haven't gone for this though, and so we'll discuss it more in scoring. Master of Orion also has some neat asymmetry, as you get 6 factions and they all definitely feel different, with usually 1 downside, 1 steep upside, different starting resources and tech, ways of generating money, planets they tend to favor, starting planet stats, 4 unique techs, and even their own action card to use every round. Oh, and then there's a backstory at the back of the cardboard. Oh no, actually even their ships can have special abilities and stats, but we'll get into that. Because since factions are so complex, I can't get into everything about each of them, but let's talk about these bugs. The Klakon Hive I played. They can use food instead of money, and can never gain or lose on rest, which sounds good because no negative VP, but it's actually kind of bad because you can never force labor with them. And their home planet is really food leaning, so you have to quickly branch out with them to get more research and hammers. Hilariously, when playing them, I found I often had too much food. This stems from their faction action, which is self-destruction, to nuke all but one pop in a system you own. And so for every removed engineer, you get 3 hammers, and for every removed farmer, you get 3 food. So we do this for our home, we get 12 resources and 1 action, ha ha ha. So much money in the form of food. I remember rushing underground hives with them to make 0 population cap become 1 on formerly uninhabitable guest planets. Then trying to get a Titan because their special Titan ship lets you build frigates and cruisers at it. My second game was with the Cabal, which are all about the diplomats called spies. Whether it be playing yours on others to use master spies, that passive they have, or grabbing your enemies and using it for your benefit with the Cabal action card. The Cabal are definitely the hardest to play in this set, with a really weak start with 1 food, and then the frigates can just move through enemies if you have your influence there, or how their cruiser must be attacked first, meaning that your 5 dice roller Titan is free to blast away. There's so much of what this faction can do because their perfect mimicry tech can copy another player's special faction action card, which kind of just blows the game wide open at what a faction is able to do. And to look at how tech tracks are different, the Cabal don't have normal terraforming. They jump straight into advanced terraforming. Here's some I didn't play: the Silicoid Crag, which can't grow population through their growth action because that does nothing, but they can spend money to move population across solar system. Yes, even to empty ones they're floating over. Then they can spend their action card, Sacred Basin, to spend 2 hammers per pop in their home to effectively grow. This sounds still kind of weak until you see that all their population produce an additional resource. Even the humans, while a bit vanilla, are still interesting at dropping tons of influence, and getting an additional die if they attack a system with influence. Let's start wrapping up this giant pro list with progression, and since this is a true 4X, it has a standard 4X isms that feel good. You progress the new systems, you explore them, you get tech. Actually, tech is with your board and tech cards, so there's double tech in this game. The difference between this and many other 4Xs is that the game can actually end much earlier than you anticipate. Remember, someone can just take Orion, which is the last system. So usually someone's 3rd system, so that's far from an unrealistic place to get to in mid-game. Then taking someone's home planet can be even faster, where they can be 2 tiles away from your home base. There's no guaranteed of timing of end here, which keeps you on your toes. Movement can be super dynamic come mid-game with the advancement of jump drive, which lets you move on only 1 connection of tiles, because normally you can only move on connections on both sides. So yeah, the board becomes super connected for you, and if you get the last upgrade, you can move through any adjacent tile, doesn't matter if it has a symbol. Master of Orion has some great replayability too, where you get to make the map at the beginning of matches of 6 different types of star sectors. And there's 4 different types of planets and multiple ways to end the game from Orion, or getting someone's base, there's the Wonder Victory, or just going to 6 rounds. Even if you play each faction twice, that's 12 plays. And you won't be able to research close to everything. Even if you only play each nuanced, complicated faction twice, that's 12 plays. And you won't even be able to research close to everything, much less even hit tier 4 in one color some games. And remember, there's specific faction techs, and you won't be able to build the massive Death Star, Doomstar every game because it's super expensive. Like, I've played this game 3 times, each with a different faction, and could see myself getting at least 2 more plays out of the tricky Cabal. Last pro, this game actually scales with player count really well. And yes, we were actually surprised on how it handles 2-player, at least for this genre, because the 4X genre usually cannot do 2-player at all. This one can kind of do it. See, while diplomats are kind of useless in 2 players, and you probably don't want to play something like Cabal that needs diplomats, the diplomacy action is still fine in 2 players because it messes with area control elements like influence and economic elements like unrest. Gameplay just leans a lot more aggressive in 2 players. One person builds up army and the other person then has to, but the game totally functions, and drafting cards amongst 2 players actually gives you a good anticipation of what they're doing that round. And then 3 players isn't victim to the Mexican standoff issue, where 3 people are just pointing a gun at each other, and then whoever ends up not fighting ends up being drastically ahead end game. That's because you can't actually turtle that much in this game with so many movement possibilities on a small map, and planets have a cap on how much you can actually grow on them, so you have to expand outwards at some point. And if you're the one who want to fight, your army is typically mostly intact because damage doesn't carry over after combat. Thus, the 3rd player who doesn't get attacked can just get attacked afterwards, as opposed to 4Xs like Sid Meier's Civilization 2010, where 2 armies blow each other up while the other guy just chuckles and ramps up. And you can needle away at your opponents through diplomacy actions and giving spies and diplomats away, so you can attack them without a full-on space fleet war per se. But yeah, definitely see how 4 players is the best player count for this game. We haven't played it for this review, but we played plenty of 4Xs to know that usually the more the merrier. Cons! Component cons time. And the colors for these minis are a little silly. There's dark red and then light red. These look the same. What the heck? Why not just use yellow for one of the factions or dark green? That's not on the board. These are also glued to their stand, which is a pretty fragile thing. But luckily, none of the Doomstars broke so far, which is good because you only have one of these per faction. It's like this prototype has a ticking time bomb of how long it has until everything just breaks. If they all break, it'll be hard to use them because different sized big ships are a bit similar looking. So yeah, you need the base to differentiate from afar. More mini concerns are these buildings, which kind of just blend together visually, making them hard to distinguish. Like on the board, you just don't really know what they are. We found ourselves constantly asking, what is your building? What does this do again? Whereas something like the immovable outposts and battle stations were clear. Maybe buildings need to play around with verticality more. Like these spiky wonder buildings are pretty easy to distinguish. As for player tokens, the 3 pieces of cardboard are just too similar in shape and size. You have a big circle, then a square the same size, and then a modified circle that has a number on it at least. Compare this to TI4, where there's a small flag, then a triangle shape. Just don't make everything square or circle-ish, or change the outline to pieces. These tokens also really don't have a place to go on the board. Like, do they go on the planet? If so, they're covering up the resource production cap. So then cover up the name, well that's gross, so then they just end up covering the middle art. It's ironic there's no space because this game has specific places for ships. Player aids kinda suck. We praised their backs before, but their front is bad. See, they include all the standard actions, but they don't really explain how they work. For instance, for invasion, it just says, all your ships from one system invade that system. Then it explains how you can boost the action. Okay, but what exactly does invading entail? Like at least say you roll dice here. It does explain construct, because that's super simple, and diplomacy, where the guide fully explains all the options, so that's not too bad. What ends up happening is that after your first game, you just mostly flip this over and reference the back. But then to see your faction's special techs, you need to flip this back over. These special tech abilities should just be on the actual player board. They could have easily been underneath the tech upgrades. Speaking of tech upgrades, the normal techs aren't explained, such as terraforming or jump drive, which left newcomers quite confused on what they do. Either put a small blurb next to them or provide a sheet to explain them. Oh, and then also this influence token should just have its own symbol because it would save a lot of text on a bunch of cards. Then I would say lots of wording in this game is kind of weird, as in English, not very good, but this was produced and developed overseas, so we can't fault it too much here. Here's a couple. It says diplomacy cards, then diplomacy card in the same action, or collective on the hive ability, or how there's technology cards, then a technology track. Well, that's confusing when talking about tech. Just call the track installments or cards the upgrades or developments. Really anything, just don't call them both tech. The same concept goes for diplomacy because there's the diplomacy action, then diplomat cards. Kind of confusing. And the diplomacy action does so many things like modifying unrest or reassigning population that it's much more aptly named management or planning. Lastly, for wording, racial is a funny way to describe factions because, I mean, come on, they're different species. Is someone gonna tell me that humans and bugs are just different races? Now it's time for gameplay cons. The first is the diplomats, which are kind of a weird fit in how fast this game can be. See, diplomats are a free action, so you do it before your normal action, and you just give a diplomat away, and they decide whether or not to accept it. And then it resolves at the end of a round, but sometimes there's not too many rounds in this game because it ends early. It's why the diplomacy option to draw 3 diplomats, then keep 1 was rarely used in our games, because we'd rather get an immediate benefit now, like reducing unrest, which is straight VP change, than have a chance to get something that we'd have to convince someone to accept. And then maybe it can only be used once or twice that game. This makes the Cabal, which thrive on using a type of diplomat called a spy, possibly very susceptible to others by just ending the game early, before these guys can fully build up a spy engine. But hey, we're not sure about this because the game does have a lot of moving parts, and we haven't tried it with 4 players. What was kind of funky is how the incentives for trade don't quite feel there in a game with so few rounds. For example, if I'm giving the research token out, that means it's gonna boost you so heavily, it's not really worth it for me to trade you that. That's why trading requires a lot more creativeness and careful 3 money for 1 resource sort of trades, rather than it being intuitive, like TI4 flipping your useless commodities so someone can enjoy trade goods, or Civilization horseback riding so you and another person both benefit. It says to do it on the card. Next gameplay con is exploration, and this is kind of at odds with how the game can end early from Orion or bases being taken, so let's get into it. So exploration in this game is 2 parts. The first is flying to a tile and seeing what planet is there, and secondly is doing the exploration action. Let's start with going to a tile. Even though you draw to pick 1 planet, they're quite varied on their benefits. See the gas giant being uninhabitable without you having high tier tech. If you draw this and then another low resource one, that can stifle your early game. Besides a planet spawn, you can also reveal another tile. This one you don't get to pick, which can knock that planet planet's VP, it can give you pirates that attack you, or even an eel, which is pretty darn strong. If you get an eel next to your base, well, it's gonna be quite some time before you can kill that. You're gonna have to upgrade from a puny frigate, survive the attack, and then grow on that area. Okay, so the second part of exploration is anomaly token, where some tiles have one, and you can spend an exploration action to expend the token to draw a magical card. This feels really clunky in a game where actions otherwise do something big. When I think about how you can boost your exploration action to do this in multiple tiles, but there's not really that many tiles with this anomaly token, much less that you're on. So boosting would rarely ever happen. To clean up this exploration action, it should just be lumped in with flight, as in the end of the flight allows you to explore, it's just that you have to pay out money or exhaust the ship. Oh, and these anomaly cards are definitely not created equal. I mean, not a huge deal, but a card like this to get a secretly guaranteed VP just cuz shouldn't exist in a game where we found winners are low double digits. Either take it out or make it cost resources to fulfill endgame like Dune Imperium, or to take an idea from TI4, attach this card to the planet so whoever owns this planet gets the extra VP. So now that we've established that you can get weaker or stronger early games via these two types of exploration, well, sometimes the game doesn't have enough time to balance that out because the game can end early through someone taking Orion or taking someone's base. Exploration just works better in longer games. And if you play to 6 rounds here, yeah, that's fine. But if you don't, exploration can be wacky. Seeing how the game is giving you all these ways to end early, the wacky exploration is just something that's built into the system. The last gameplay con is how some of the secret objectives, aka the secret missions, just aren't quite there with the balancing, but we know this is hard to do. It's hard to balance these games with secret things. Basically, you shouldn't get rewarded for something you're already getting points for, like getting population in your empire. And if it is going to be like this, just reduce the VP payout or cap it at 3 or 4. These also just don't feel very well scaled for player count. Like, since the map is bigger at 4 players, it's easier to have systems further away from your home system for this card to rack up way more points. Or if you're playing 7 to 8 rounds, it's just much easier to get secret missions that reward you for having more tech. Then surely this one that says you get 7 VP if you own Orion is not an additional 7 points over the Orion 5 points. Surely you're not getting 12 points overall. It just means that you're getting 7 in total. It has to be, right? It has to be. But yeah, this whole secret mission complaint is a minor con. I would just end the section with saying that maybe there could be a way to look at someone else's secret mission, like maybe through a diplomat card, or maybe through just reaching the highest level of government technology. Scoring! So now it's time for a tentative score on Master of Orion at Astra, this prototype, where we try to critically evaluate the aforementioned pros and cons with the caveat of whether or not this is even a good idea in the first place. And this is a space for X with all the X's achieved. It's a great idea. We know these are good ideas. One more thing before the score though, this game won't be available to back for a couple months, so I'm sure the devs are taking notes, and I was sure not to blast them for their Google Doc rulebook, which wasn't the greatest, but everything's a work in progress, right? Anyways, this game is gonna be, tentatively so far, a 7 out of 10. It is tentatively good. Master of Orion at Astra is a big game, with plenty of card play, research opportunities, and uncertain endings. All while armies stay small and bookkeeping isn't too bad. In fact, you don't even have different phases to worry about, like in Twilight Imperium, they have a voting phase, or how those games' action cards have all sorts of different timings to surprise your opponents. This is a true 4X that can end early, which understandably will mean constant conflict with neighbors over a map that just isn't big, considering how frigates can move 2 tiles from the get-go. There's lots of puzzling you can do with how to manage population, which of the techs in your hand you'll actually pursue, and when's the right time to pass, so maybe you can get that free resource to squeeze out an amazing tech next round. Like the thought of moving your own population so your opponent doesn't get points for influence in your planet appeals to you, you should look further into this. There's no ground troops to worry about, you can't always get the tech cards you perfectly want, but factions are still plenty distinct with tons of reason to play again to try those faction tech tracks that will transform your strategy. There's lots of adapting you have to do with seeing more tech cards, diplomats, and exploration of planets. And then someone could Hail Mary into Orion, go nuclear off rolling to kill the Guardian, and then use those 6 resources to chain some mega grow action between 3 planets. And there's supposed to be 14 factions from information I've been sent. So yeah, this could be Kickstarter teasing, but that's super hype. But this game still isn't great, at least not yet. There's a lot of jank with balance, and I know 4X's can self-balance, but there's a lot of randomness with drafting cards every round, and then also the exploration. And the game can be short. In fact, there's so much emergent randomness that it can be a weird balancing and that you're never sure if you're gonna get the right stuff. I don't know, there's just a lot of questions. This game is really big. For example, it's really hard to get a definitive grasp on the Wonder Victory, aka the HTTP, TCP, and UDP line. because it feels excessively expensive and needing so many resources, and it doesn't even give a defensive or economic bonus in a game that doesn't already encourage turtling. But maybe this is valid in 4 players, especially if people are playing safe. I'm just concerned it's something that they might have put in to try to cater towards the video game fans. Another question is how you can play this game to 7 to 8 rounds, to stretch this much further than 1 hour per player. Maybe that would make the Wonder Victory more possible, but we only played 6 rounds. And actually 2 out of 3 games we played ended early at less than an hour per player. And so this game could take 30 minutes per player too. Like if you do the math, this orange construction building isn't even worth its cost in most cases, unless you go to 7 to 8 rounds. But yeah, I would recommend Master of Orion at any of the player counts here, even at 2-player, which is surprising. The drafting and area control still holds up at 2P. Just be warned of its inherent limitations in a 4X. Master of Orion is this compromise between big 4X with tons of mechanics and board in a package that you'll actually finish in a couple of hours. And nowadays, for accessibility, we'd rather have these games lean shorter than longer, so again, can't fault the current system too much on exploration, but curious to see how that'll be handled. Our personal scores will tell more of the story, starting with our newest member of Shelfside, another fellow TI4 fan. You've probably seen him around. There's a lot of shots of him in these things.
Hello, I'm Alexander. I'm the KDM guy. I've played a lot of Twilight Imperium, but I have very limited experience with other 4X games or any other space science fiction board game, but I really like sci-fi board games. I like asymmetry, I like strategy games, and I like games that have a lot of depth that you can really dig your teeth into. Along those lines, I think Master of Orion excels. It's easily an 8 out of 10 for me, and I think it delivers on being a lighter, shorter version of Twilight Imperium, of delivering that same sort of feeling. Having a very strong theme is more important to me over the game being balanced. I really like science fiction, so I think the setting for Master of Orion is cool. I played the video game a little bit when I was younger. I think it's interesting how we've come full circle, how Master of Orion, this board game, is based on the video game, which was based on a board game in the 70s, Stellar Conquest by Avalon Hill. I think the various factions are all distinct. They have enough going on individually that I could see myself playing each one at least twice, if not thrice, and getting a completely distinct experience. So if I had to rate Master of Orion on the complexity versus fun chart, I think it does a good job of providing a lot of depth that you can really dig your teeth into. And the rules are very easy to understand. It's very easy to teach the game. I was able to teach it within 20 minutes, so I would say it's a medium weight game. I'm a bit biased. I really like heavyweight games, but this is where I think Master of Orion goes, is it's sort of striking this perfect balance between it has a lot going on, but not too much that it becomes overwhelming. I really like the card drafting mechanic of the game. At one point in one of the games I was playing, I was drafting cards purely for their actions, and earlier in the game, I was drafting them purely for their developments, and I think that's a very clean way of breaking up the complexity. I think the 4 different tech branches are also distinct enough that when you play a faction, if you go down one tech branch versus another, you're going to have a very unique gameplay experience. I thought the game was fun at 2-player. I thought it was great at 3-player. I imagine playing with 4 is the best, and I imagine expansions would only serve to make this game even more fun. It has a good enough element of randomness that the game is exciting, but it's not so beholden to dice rolls that you can repeatedly botch rolls and just ruin your entire strategy from the get-go.
My personal score for Master of Orion is going to be a 8 out of 10. I have an awesome time with this game. You know me, I love my Space 4Xs. This fits the bill. In fact, I like it so much that I think this is probably one of my top 15 to 20 games I want to play right now. And for reasons I'll be unpacking in this personal score, I don't know if it would hit that 9 out of 10 range. I'm not sure, there's just a lot to unpack here. Essentially, Master of Orion is kind of everything I wanted from a 4X that wasn't TI4 styled. This game has exploration, it has intense combats, it has multiple ways to win, amazing feeling progression, and unique feeling factions that have a lot of character. Like the fact that you can boost any action by paying more money, or get instant resources by forced labor, so then you get unrest, which you'll have to resolve later. This is awesome. It makes your economy feel like you can pivot in a lot of ways you want to, even though every turn is simply just playing one card from your hand. And I also like playing one card from your hand too, so that works. I'll never forget the game I boosted to unrest -9 VP and ended the game with 1 point. And it was hilarious. Yeah, my plan backfired. If I didn't even play the game, I would have had more points with my starting planet. So yeah, the economy is so satisfying that even if I don't attack a lot, I'm still having fun. And there's ways to interact through diplomats and then also the influence mechanic, which I found was very clever. This game gives shades of Twilight Imperium, with secret objectives for uncertainty, new public missions to give more tension every round, and the stream of upgrades keeps coming in to make the already impactful dice rolling feel fresh. And combat here never feels repetitive or hard to manage, like Eclipse second and late game. And I actually like how it's so simple in this game with just vanilla D6s. Master of Orion also feels exceptionally well timed at an hour per player, maybe even less as we get faster at this game and maybe we end early. This puts it at about the Civ Myers Civilization 2010 realm for me. Except this game is way easier to pick up because I don't have to plop down a tech deck in front of my friends and say, memorize or die. No, like really, if you fall behind in Civ 2010, you're just kind of screwed. Speaking of Civ, man, I loved how that game looks. And for Master of Orion, well, it just kind of looks okay to me. I have no connection with the Master of Orion franchise. Like maybe it just needs more art for me to be more immersed with the game. This means that some turns actually feel fairly abstract, which is one of the biggest barriers for it to reach 9 out of 10. And Master of Orion isn't as epic as Civ or TI4. One reason is that while bookkeeping for fleets is much easier, the trade-off is that less troops makes combat always feel like skirmishes. Tense skirmishes, mind you, but nothing that feels like the edge of the universe is reliant on millions of lives at stake. And upgrading planets doesn't feel as good as Civ cities, like many upgrades are just tech cards or track. But it still feels good in Master of Orion for how streamlined the process is. And I know they couldn't have any crazy abilities because how the game needs to maybe end early. Like one of TI4's many awesome features is that there's a perpetual King of the Hill going on for Mechitol Rex with 6 players, but this takes a lot of time if you want the King of the Hill to play out well. And Master of Orion has far from that because once Orion is taken, the game ends soon, so you have some time to play around it, but there's really not a lot, and that's not the main focus of this game. But the fact that Master of Orion is streamlined for far easier setup, teach, and finish works. I just need something that I can get to the table and people will easily play with me. Like Master of Orion doesn't have TI4 voting, but I don't mind because its scope is entirely different. It's not really a space opera, it's more like a space skirmish with neutral pirates flying around, much like how I'd imagine a proven old space video game would be. Wait a second. To wrap up, playing this prototype gave me huge shades of 12 years ago when I bought Twilight Imperium 3 and was fascinated by its mechanics. I wasn't really into the Twilight Imperium lore at the time, but I got into it after enjoying the mechanics so much. And then when TI4 came out, it was insta-buy, insta-love. It was great. And so I'm thinking maybe this might happen with Master of Orion. Maybe the prototype is like TI3, and then the final version is like TI4. I don't know, maybe it could crack my top 10 games of all time. We'll see, we will see. Thank you for watching this review, this prototype review of Master of Orion at Astra. Again, this being sent to us to not affect scoring. And as always, yeah, thank you for watching. Let me know what you think of this game, how it compares to your favorites like Eclipse or Twilight Imperium, or maybe Galactic Era. That's an interesting one. Anyways, thank you to our patrons over here for making videos like this possible. We got coffee if you guys want to support us through that too. And yeah, remember to like, comment, subscribe. This was a big review to me. Okay,